cycling around the country with mate Kev. We've stumbled up on this little place called Putsonderwater. It's an abandoned railway settlement. Now, it got the economist in me thinking about how economies work and how they are formed and how they can die if not looked after or if they can't reinvent themselves. It's a famous little town in the Afrikaans language, the name used to indicate some far off or remote place in the Afrikaans language in a very similar way as Timbuktu is used in the English language. Now, as I was sitting there pondering this ghost town, abandoned buildings and all, the economist in me came out and pondered the economic lessons that one can learn out of Putsonderwater. And I think that the main economic lesson that we can learn as economists, as planners and as people is that it's about your anchor economic sector is very important. I call it the anchor sector for lack of a better word. Now, what is an anchor sector? Well, let's talk retail centers. Let's give an analogy, anchor tenants. The anchor tenant is often a big food and grocery retailer that is the main driver of footfall and purchasing power into a shopping center. And then all the other smaller shops, which wouldn't attract footfall necessarily on their own, benefit because people come there to do their food and grocery shopping, but then they do their other shopping and eating, etc., while they're about it. So the anchor tenant is incredibly important in a shopping center. In an economy, it is incredibly important too. But Putsonderwater was an economy, a very tiny little economy, tiny little settlement next to a railway station, but it was an economy nevertheless. Its anchor sector, its key reason for its existence, I think, and its key driver of money purchasing power into Putsonderwater, which is important because you need to procure goods and services from outside there to survive. It's not a subsistence existence anymore. There's a specialization of economic activity these days. So money coming in is very important to an economy. The key driver of that was the railways by miles. The railways was important because Putsonderwater station was where freight would come and be offloaded and loaded to and from to go to and from Kenhardt, a much bigger town than Putsonderwater, not so far away, by road. Freight would also go to Groblershoop and other various towns in the region, so it was crucial. And of course, passengers would come through there, passenger trains would stop, and passengers would go on and off, and they would bring purchasing power to that area, along with railway staff who were employed by the railways and needed to be there, who had purchasing power too. So the related or linked services to the railway function emerged. It had a hotel. I'm sure many passengers are waiting for trains stayed at that hotel or ate and drank at that hotel while they were waiting. There was a general dealer for the people to shop that lived in the town and probably in the surroundings too. Eventually there was a church. There were people living there, and there were kids there, and there was a little school there. And so you had this tiny little economy, I wouldn't say with related or linked industries, dependent on the railway function and what it brought, but let's call it goods and services, little tiny economic sectors that existed, retail for instance. But the problem with Putsonderwater is that one big anchor tenant eventually closed down. The railways eventually, it was no longer realistic to use goods to transport freight by rail. Roads had improved over the years. Eventually the laws changed and road freight was far more allowed, and you could do it far more time effectively by road to Groblershoop, to Kenhardt, directly from Cape Town or Joburg or wherever you needed to go from, than to go via this inefficient railway system. So the railway scaled back. The railway staff, I guess, at some point were moved out of there. The railways closed down. Passenger trains didn't stop there anymore. And all the services, one by one, the retailer, the church, the school, the post office, because post came via there, to close down. They were no longer needed. And Putsonderwater eventually became a ghost town. It tells us the importance of the anchor sector. If the railways had still been functioning today, and passengers had been going in and out, and freight had been going in and out of Putsonderwater, 10-1, the little Putsonderwater economy with its retailer and church and school and post office, etc., would probably still exist. The health of an economy is to a large extent driven by the health of its anchor sector. Very, very important. We can't just look at GDP in its entirety and say, wow, we've got a GDP of X. We need to look at the health and the threats to that anchor sector. It is crucial, especially in the case of small towns whose economies are less diversified and often only have one anchor sector, unlike cities who may have a few. That anchor sector is everything. And when it left Putsonderwater, Putsonderwater's end was a fait accompli.